Well, moving on here, Apple's product event shining a spotlight on the tech giant's latest innovations. Apple revealing its latest AirPods revamp, new Apple Watch models, and of course, an all-new iPhone. CEO Tim Cook pointing to the AI capabilities for the iPhone 16.
The next generation of iPhone has been designed for Apple Intelligence from the ground up. It marks the beginning of an exciting new era.
Well, for more on Apple's fresh batch of product announcements, we've got creative strategy CEO and principal analyst Ben Bajarin. Ben, it is great to have you on the show. Big question for investors, of course, Ben. This new iPhone 16 is going to spark a meaningful iPhone upgrade cycle. Last time we talked to you, Ben, you said you did expect this to have, I think you said a stronger than normal refresh cycle. I believe that's how you framed it, which should sound, relatively bullish. Now that we officially have the news, Ben, you sticking with that view?
Yeah, and I think I want to continue to temper, as I've been largely like, we don't think super cycle because there was dynamics that led to the last super cycle, which I don't think are repeated here. But that being said, I do think that there's so much evidence that Apple has a very, very aging installed base, a good portion of the base going back to even just iPhone 12 and beyond. So you have to imagine that a lot of those folks are just up against their upgrade cycle. And so I look at this within that lens of a huge portion of their base with aging devices, looking and trying to be enticed, right, to buy. And I think they did a really good job with this lineup. In fact, I actually think that the base iPhone 16 is probably the best base iPhone they've ever made, which could actually very interestingly lead to a stronger cycle for the base model, where this is actually, we've actually noticed a mix shift the last couple of years to the Pro. And I think if that happens, if this aging base does more opt for iPhone 16, we might see more of that mix shift either go toward iPhone 16, which again is not something we've seen before, and we'll see a stronger sales cycle for that, which again might impact ASPs slightly. But I do think there's a lot of optimism and a lot of stuff to increase and entice upgraders to the base level iPhone 16 just because of how good that product is.
Interesting. We were showing some of the demo of that. By the way, I like the contrast between Tim Cook standing in front of a big screen of an outdoor scene, and you actually outdoors in front of real trees. Those are not AI trees behind you, Ben Bajarin. But that brings up AI, and we are seeing the stock at the lows of the session. The company said it wasn't coming out with any new Apple Intelligence features today that we didn't know about already. It wasn't really expected that they would, was it? Or were you looking for a little bit more on that front?
I mean, I do think there's a couple things, right? With the iPhone 16 lineup, they do have this feature called visual intelligence, which basically lets you use the camera to take a picture of any object, and then it will go and get that information about what that is. That's useful. I think that's coming only to the iPhone 16 models and beyond. So there is that one thing that sort of sets it apart. But other than that, the vast majority of Apple Intelligence experiences will come to iPhone 15 and later. And we know that that's coming out in a open beta to everyone in October, and then more of those features like Genmoji and a whole host of other things coming out later on or early into next year. So all of that I think is relevant to two things. One, I think there's just a lot of people who do need to upgrade. I think the hardware will entice them. I think the carrier promotions will entice them, with the hope that Apple Intelligence continues to be very, very interesting and help sell this cycle and strengthen this cycle over time. But I'm not sure that's going to be the immediate rush, just again, because we don't know when many of these new features are coming out. And I think it's just still going to be a hardware rush, which is why I say very, very compelling in just the base hardware capabilities of iPhone 16 to entice those upgraders.
Ben, I'm curious because you do a lot of important survey work. Why typically do people decide to upgrade? What's the reason? Is it battery? Is it camera, design changes, all three?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Josh. I mean, we have always a list of options in our surveys, and one of them is just it's old and slow. And it would not shock you that that is the predominant reason that people choose, is that it just feels old and slow. And I think, when you just look at how good phones have gotten the last few years, that they last a really long time. We're using premium components, particularly Apple. The silicon can sustain a long period of OS updates, so they hasn't felt the need to really upgrade. In fact, I talked about this maybe even with you years ago, just the idea that because Apple silicon is so good, it actually elongates this cycle because it performs so well for longer. And that's just led to people just saying, hey, I don't have a reason to upgrade yet. I'm okay with what I have. And so I do think we're really up at that edge. In fact, I think we're up at that edge probably more so than we've really ever been in the last couple of years, which is, again, why I'm a little bit more optimistic to this cycle. But again, I think that benefits the iPhone 16 more than the Pro, which is not something we would have talked about in last, fall quarter upgrade cycles.
Ben, it's funny because at one point, there were complaints that Apple sort of timed it, that the stuff would wear out on a cadence, so that you would need to get new ones. But this does also raise the question of if the real advance here is going to be more software-based than hardware-based in terms of AI in the phone, what is the next big hardware change? I mean, you look at Huawei, which is coming out with a Z Fold phone today that, I guess, folds sort of like an accordion, and they've got 3 million pre-orders for that thing. Is that the next thing we should be looking to?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because folding phones just still have a lot of durability issues. We're getting closer to solving those, and I think Apple just takes the conservative approach. I think it's hard because we're sort of out of the era where we're just amazed by hardware wizardry. I do think folding phones will make a very interesting addition to this lineup. I don't expect it anytime soon. And I think because of that, that's why we're leaning more towards software and the ingredient that is AI to enable some of these features that we hope people view solve some pain points and adds usefulness to their life. Because we're just squarely in a very software cycle right now with just the hard challenge of year-over-year hardware innovation just getting more difficult. But I'm as optimistic as any in foldables. Again, we don't see those sales in mass quantities. And so I don't think it's something that Apple's on the immediate horizon on, but that certainly is an interesting form factor change that we could see in the next couple of years, get more traction. But again, we're not seeing volume in those sales categories yet.
Ben, it wasn't just iPhone today, of course. It was AirPods, it was Watch. Wearables, really important part of this company's story now. What stood out to you there, Ben?
Yeah, so I would say, again, from a financial standpoint, I would be watching very closely this segment category, because it does seem that, again, Apple knows there's a lot of people with very old AirPods and very old Apple Watches who, again, haven't upgraded. And I think that we may see a very strong upgrade cycle for AirPods across the board. Obviously, AirPods 4, new redesign, an option including with active noise canceling. You've got some of the hearing aid functions that I actually think is going to be very, very interesting to a lot of people, particularly in AirPods Pro, and just the new design of Series 10 getting larger, even a slightly larger display than Apple Watch, I think will be super compelling. So I would expect a much stronger than anticipated upgrade cycle for the category of wearables for Apple, given what I saw product-wise today.
All right, we'll be watching those numbers when they do start to come in. Ben Bajarin, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes. Thanks for having me. Anytime.